Imagine walking into a rehearsal today, unpacking your instrument, and being told by the concertmaster that you are legally forbidden from playing any note above a B natural in the treble clef.
Right, yeah. Like anything above the second ledger line is just strictly off limits.
Exactly. To a modern string player, that sounds like this bizarre, almost dystopian joke. But in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, that wasn't a joke at all. It was the unspoken law of the orchestra.
Oh, absolutely. If you dared to shift into the upper register, you were treated as, well, an arrogant trespasser.
Yeah. So welcome to the deep dive. Today our mission is to explore Chapter 13 of Maurice W. Riley's The History of the Viola, Volume 1. And for all the players tuning in to this Viola Studio deep dive, this isn't just some, biographical recount of a musician.
No, not at all. This is an anatomical and really an acoustic dissection of the architectural foundation of modern playing. We are isolating the exact methodologies of Lionel Tertis and the English school.
Because to understand the DNA of your daily practice, you really have to look at the historical scaffolding that built it. We are going to examine how one individual systematically dismantled the physical, acoustical, and sociological limitations of an entire instrument.
And when we discuss the diagnostic landscape of string pedagogy, we're dealing with incredibly muddy waters. Passed down traditions, invisible physical tensions, rigid orthodoxies. What Tertis did was bring an engineer's precision to those muddy waters.
And we have a treasury of highly specific details to get through for you today. We're talking instrument dimensions down to the fraction of a centimeter.
The biomechanics of revolutionary fingering systems.
Right, and pedagogical philosophies that just violently drag this instrument out of the orchestral shadows.
Welcome to Viola Studio. We are a YouTube channel dedicated to the technical, pedagogical, and artistic development of viola students and instrumentalists. In every episode, our goal is to provide a concise and entertaining analysis. We will explore key themes, the messages of the great masters, and the historical context that shaped the sound of our instrument. Whether you are taking your first steps in the alto clef, or you are a professional seeking a new perspective, there is something for everyone at Viola Studio.
Don't miss our upcoming episodes, and remember,
there's always time to explore the history and the heart of classical music.
Before we get to the structural redesign, we really need to understand the acoustic and social baseline.
Yeah, we have to set the scene.
Exactly. If the culture dictated that anything above a B natural was trespassing, what exactly did the landscape look like before Tertis stepped onto the stage?
Well, the landscape was highly fragmented. The critical thing to grasp here is that Tertis wasn't the absolute first person to realize the instrument was being suppressed.
Right. There were others before him.
Yeah. There were 19th century pioneers attempting to elevate it, but their influence was strictly regional. And their methods, well, they often failed to translate into a lasting international solo tradition.
So give us an example. Like, what was happening in Germany?
Take Germany, for instance. You had Hermann Ritter. He was a highly capable virtuoso, and he actually accurately diagnosed a fundamental acoustic problem, which was that standard violas of the time were just too small to produce a true tenor resonance.
Right. The physics just didn't work.
Exactly. So to fix this, he championed an instrument he called the viola alta.
But wait, if Ritter already diagnosed the size issue and, built a larger instrument to solve the acoustic deficit, why did the viola alta just become the global standard right then and there?
Because Ritter approached the acoustic problem without solving the biomechanical problem. Yeah, the viola alta was massive. Like, some models approached or even exceeded 18 inches in body length.
18 inches? Holding that under your chin, that's practically a cello.
It is. The physical strain placed on the human anatomy to play an 18-inch instrument under the chin is catastrophic. You're dealing with extreme ulnar deviation in the left wrist.
Just ripping the hand apart.
Exactly. Overextension of the intrinsic hand muscles and severe torque on the left shoulder. Now, Ritter impressed German conductors and composers, including Richard Wagner, actually, with the sheer volume and tone of the instrument.
But he couldn't physically keep it up?
Right. He couldn't sustain a long career as a soloist, likely due in part to those physical demands. Ultimately, his focus drifted from active virtuosity toward academia and musicology.
So he just sort of wrote about it instead of playing it?
Yeah, he wrote books on music history and dedicated his life to trying to convince others to adopt the viola alta. But, purely academic crusade rarely shifts a deeply entrenched performance culture.
It's like telling someone a car is faster, but the steering wheel is covered in spikes. So Germany had this physical behemoth that proved unplayable for the masses. Were there other regional players getting closer to the mark? Or was the rest of the world stuck in a similar slump?
Well, France had Maurice Vieux, who was a superb artist and an incredibly gifted teacher at the Conservatoire de Paris. Vieux had a much more sophisticated approach to the bow arm, deeply rooted in the French school of tone production.
Did he have repertoire?
He did. He inspired an entire generation of excellent French players and successfully pressured composers like the Belgian Joseph Jongen to write masterpieces for the instrument.
Okay, but again, that sounds very regional.
It was. Vieux's influence remained geographically locked to France and Belgium, and then in Russia you had Vladimir Bakalenov.
Ah, right.
Yeah, he laid the foundation at the Moscow Conservatory for the Russian school before eventually migrating to the United States at the age of 42.
Which is a huge shift.
Huge. Bakalenov was a monumental figure who taught Vadim Borisovsky. But again, Bakalenov didn't maintain a sustained, singular career purely as an international touring soloist.
So you've got these three figures, Ritter, Vieux, Bakalenov, and they establish high standards of excellence in their respective corners of the world. But none of them managed to shatter the global perception of the instrument.
No, the stigma remained.
Which brings us to the specific environment in England around 1906. And this is where the sheer hostility toward the instrument just becomes palpable. There's this anecdote from the source material involving Alfred Gibson.
Oh, the Gibson story.
Yeah.
Yes, Gibson played in the highly respected Joachim Quartet, and this anecdote perfectly encapsulates the entrenched hierarchy of the string section at that time.
So what exactly happened?
Well, Tertis was performing Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto, transcribed for the viola, at an Academy concert. He was actively demonstrating that the instrument possessed the agility and brilliance required for major violin repertoire.
And Gibson's reaction wasn't awe. It was like outright revulsion.
Total revulsion. He approaches Tertis and just bursts out, I'll quote it. "The viola is not meant to be played high up. This is the pig department. I suppose the next thing is you will be playing behind the bridge."
The pig department. That is just, it's a stunning phrase to hear from a professional string player regarding their own chosen instrument.
It reveals the deeply internalized subjugation of the section. I mean, the English scene was anchored in a tradition that viewed the inner voices purely as harmonic filler.
Like they were just there to play the offbeats.
Exactly. The prevailing belief was that the instrument was essentially a dumping ground for violinists who lacked the technical facility to survive in the first violin section.
And didn't the equipment of the time make it worse?
Oh, significantly. The thicker gut strings of the era, combined with archaic bowing techniques, produced a sluggish, unrefined sound when played in the upper registers. Rather than developing the technique required to make the upper register sing, the establishment simply declared the upper register off limits.
It's the ultimate fixed mindset. Like, it's as if someone told a concert pianist they were legally forbidden from touching the top right half of the keyboard. The instrument sounds bad up high, therefore the instrument is inherently flawed, therefore we must ban anyone from going up high.
Right, it's completely backward logic.
It required a complete outsider to look at that equation and realize the flaw wasn't in the wood or the strings, the flaw was in the human interface.
Yes, the player.
Let's look at where Lionel Tertis came from, because his early life completely explains why he didn't share this fixed, string-centric mentality.
The chronology here is essential. So Lionel Tertis was born on December 29, 1876 in West Hartlepool, England. He was born into a working-class immigrant family. His father was a Russian Jewish cantor, and his mother was Polish.
And they moved to London pretty early on, right?
Yeah, they relocated to London when he was just 3 months old. And this is vital. His very first exposure to music wasn't a pedagogical treatise on string playing. It was the human voice. He cited his father's singing in the synagogue as his foundational musical memory.
And when he did begin formal training, it wasn't even on a string instrument at all.
Correct. He began piano lessons at the age of 5. This is the single most critical factor in his later development of string tone. He didn't just learn the piano, he became a highly proficient teenage professional.
Like he was actually gigging.
He was gigging, playing piano in small bands just to fund his first violin lessons.
I find this fascinating, because how does the biomechanics and the musical philosophy of a gigging pianist translate to revolutionary string playing? A pianist presses keys, a string player drags horsehair across gut. The physical actions seem entirely divorced from one another.
On the surface, sure, the physical actions are different, but the conceptualization of sound production and harmonic structure is deeply intertwined. A pianist playing at a high level understands weight transfer.
Meaning what, exactly?
Well, you don't produce a massive resonant piano tone merely by firing the small muscles of the fingers. You produce it by releasing the relaxed weight of the arm and back into the keys.
So it's a full-body mechanic.
Exactly. When Tertis eventually applied a bow to a string, he intuitively understood that producing a huge, continuous sound required the engagement of the larger muscle groups, the back, the shoulder, the natural weight of the arm, rather than just superficially pressing into the string with the hand.
That makes so much sense.
And musically, a pianist processes a polyphonic score. They see the bass line, the inner voices, and the melody simultaneously. When Tertis later looked at an orchestral or chamber score, he didn't just see a single melodic line. He understood exactly how his inner voice functioned within the vertical harmonic structure.
That structural awareness is a huge advantage.
Yeah.
But his actual path into the string world was pretty brutal. I mean, in 1892, he enters Trinity College of Music in London to study piano with R.W. Lewis and violin with B.M. Carotis.
Right.
But he only has enough money for 2 terms, runs out of funds, and is forced to drop out. He goes back to playing piano in bands just to survive and save enough to return. And when he does go back, he finally pivots to focus entirely on the violin.
And that pivot leads him to a massive geographical and pedagogical disappointment, because the assumption at the time was that true string mastery could only be attained in Germany. So in 1894, Tertis travels to Leipzig to study violin with Professor Boland at the Conservatorium.
But the rigid German violin pedagogy of the late 19th century completely clashes with what Tertis is searching for musically, doesn't it?
Completely. The Leipzig school of that era favored a very robust, perhaps dogmatic approach to the right arm. It was highly disciplined, but lacked the nuance, flexibility, and continuous phrasing that Tertis was internally seeking.
So he just bails.
He found the environment stifling and left after a mere 6 months. He returns to London, pieces together funding with the help of Lionel de Rothschild, and becomes an intermittent student at the Royal Academy of Music, studying violin with Hans Wesley.
So he's grinding away at the violin, dealing with all this financial instability, jumping between schools, and then the catalyst happens. And it isn't some burning, innate passion for the viola.
No, not at all.
A fellow student simply casually suggests that he play the inner voice in a string quartet. He literally just fills an empty chair.
The pragmatism of that moment is striking. But sitting in that chair, experiencing the acoustic resonance of the alto clef within a live quartet, it just completely rewired his ambitions.
It's crazy how fast he moved after that.
The transition was explosive. Between 1899 and 1900, he is already back at the Royal Academy as a sub-professor, primarily to play in the string orchestra under Émile Sauret. By 1901, he is appointed a full professor and is invited to play in a quartet led by his former violin teacher, Hans Wesley.
Our hero didn't even pick up the viola out of a burning passion. He just filled a seat, and suddenly he's a full professor playing with his old teacher. The speed of that ascent is staggering.
It really is.
He went from a financially struggling violin student to a full professor in just a few years, simply because he found the acoustic space where his concept of sound actually fit. But the instrument still had the stigma of the pig department?
Right. He needed to prove what it could do.
Exactly. To change that, he needed a sonic model, a sound that nobody had ever heard come from the instrument before.
Yeah.
And in 1901, he found that model in the playing of Fritz Kreisler.
Fritz Kreisler's London debut in 1901 was the acoustic shockwave that gave Tertis the blueprint for the future. Kreisler possessed a tone that was fundamentally different from the austere, rigid style prevalent in the late 19th century.
What was Kreisler doing differently?
Kreisler employed an intensely expressive, continuous vibrato, and his bow arm was incredibly fluid, allowing for phrases that breathed seamlessly. Tertis absorbed this entirely.
He didn't just absorb it, he codified it. Nearly 4 decades later, in 1938, Tertis published a manifesto titled Beauty of Tone in String Playing.
Such an important document.
And it is only 22 pages long, but it completely rewrites the biomechanical laws of the instrument. Kreisler himself actually wrote an unsolicited foreword for it.
That shows the level of respect Kreisler had for him.
Totally. Let's dig into the specific physiological mechanics Tertis demanded in those 22 pages, starting with the left hand and the concept of continuous vibrato, because this is so crucial for the viola studio audience.
The vibrato on a larger stringed instrument presents a unique physics problem. The strings are thicker, they have higher mass, and they are under significant tension. In the 19th century, the prevailing technique was either a completely straight, dead tone or a very narrow, fast finger vibrato used purely as an occasional ornament.
Like a trill, almost.
Exactly. But Tertis demanded a continuous vibrato that originated not just from the finger or the wrist, but involved the entire forearm, allowing for a wider, slower oscillation that could actually manipulate the heavy fundamental frequency of the string.
But the physical endurance required to maintain a continuous wide forearm vibrato on heavy gut strings, I mean, that is immense.
It requires an absolute release of tension in the hand. If you grip the neck of the instrument tightly, the forearm locks, and continuous vibrato becomes physically impossible, leading to immediate tendinitis.
So how did he teach them to avoid locking up?
Tertis's pedagogy required the player to balance the weight of the left arm dynamically, transferring the contact point smoothly from the finger pad to the string, maintaining the oscillation even during shifts. This continuous oscillation gave the tone a vocal, living quality that had previously been reserved solely for the violin and cello.
Basically, before Tertis, violists were playing with unequal tone, awkward bow changes, and zero vibrato. No wonder composers hated writing solos for them. Was the instrument's bad reputation just a symptom of terrible left-hand technique?
Well, the left hand is only half the equation. The right hand, the bow arm, is where the actual sound is generated, and his demands for the bow were equally revolutionary. He insisted on absolute equality of tone from all parts of the bow.
Which is fighting physics, right?
Entirely. The physics of the bow naturally dictate an inequality of tone. At the frog, you have the entire weight of your arm resting directly over the string. At the tip, the weight is displaced, and the string is relying purely on the applied pressure of the index finger.
So you naturally get a decrescendo.
Right. Before Tertis, players largely accepted this natural decay, resulting in a sound that swelled at the frog and disappeared at the tip. Tertis demanded biomechanical compensation.
Yeah.
He required the player to use pronation of the right forearm, rotating the arm inward to apply torque through the index finger as the bow approached the tip, effectively matching the acoustic weight of the frog.
And he didn't just want equality of tone. He demanded invisible or inaudible bow changes. The moment you switch from a down bow to an up bow, how do you mask a physical change in direction so completely that the listener cannot perceive it?
It requires extreme microflexibility in the knuckles and the wrist of the right hand. When the arm changes direction, if the hand is rigid, there is a microsecond where the string stops vibrating, causing an audible click or gasp in the sound.
I hate that sound.
We all do. Tertis taught that the fingers must act as shock absorbers. As the arm begins the new stroke, the fingers gracefully lag behind for a fraction of a second, ensuring that the hair never loses its continuous weighted traction on the string. This figure-eight motion of the hand masks the directional shift, creating an illusion of infinite breath.
Infinite breath. I love that. And he took this concept of infinite breath and applied it to the left hand during string crossings, too. The text notes he advocated leaving the finger down and vibrating until the note on the next string is actively sounding.
Yes!
Let's analyze the acoustics of this overlap, because this is brilliant.
It is a masterstroke of acoustic engineering. When you stop a string with your finger and then lift it off prematurely to move to the next string, the fundamental pitch abruptly dies. The resulting silence, even if it is only a millisecond long, breaks the phrase.
It tears the fabric.
Precisely. By keeping the finger anchored and vibrating while the bow initiates the new note on the adjacent string, Tertis utilized sympathetic resonance. The original string continues to ring, allowing the overtones to bleed into the new pitch.
And didn't he also use portamento for this?
He did. He advocated for the judicious use of portamento, sliding the finger along the string to connect notes to guarantee that the harmonic fabric was never torn.
So if we look back at the pig department era, players were using zero continuous vibrato, their bow changes were harsh and audible, their tone died at the tip of the bow, and they lifted their fingers too early, creating gaps in the sound. The instrument wasn't flawed. The human interface was simply archaic.
Exactly. Tertis's pupil, Bernard Shore, outlined 4 pillars of Tertis's legacy that directly addressed these archaic practices.
What were the 4 pillars?
Shore summarized the revolution perfectly. First, Tertis's artistry proved the instrument could handle extreme technical demands, inspiring composers to write new literature that extended the range an octave higher than the old B natural limit.
Bypassing the band.
Right. Second, he utilized vibrato as intensely as any violinist or cellist, completely altering the timbral profile of the inner voice. Third, he shattered the myth of the unequal strings, the idea that the A string sounded nasal while the C string sounded tubby by using bow control to equalize the tone colors.
And the fourth?
And fourth, he championed a larger, acoustically superior instrument and invented the fingerings required to play it.
Okay, that fourth pillar is where the physics get incredibly intense. Let's examine the Tertis model and the complete re-engineering of the fingering system, because a massive sound requires a massive physical apparatus. Tertis understood that to get the continuous sound he wanted, he needed a larger physical resonator. He began conducting exhaustive acoustic experiments in 1937.
He was dealing with the ultimate Goldilocks problem of string instrument design. The ideal acoustic length to naturally project a C string vibrating at 130.8 Hz is significantly longer than what a human can hold under their chin. It is much closer to the dimensions of a cello.
Right, so a viola is, by definition, an acoustic compromise.
Always. Tertis observed that most instruments being played were simply too small, around 15 to 15.5 inches, resulting in a thin nasal sound that lacked the fundamental depth of the C string. Conversely, the instruments that did possess that depth were often over 17 inches, which, as we discussed with Hermann Ritter, caused immense physical damage to the player.
So Tertis sets out to find the exact, non-negotiable physical dimension that maximizes resonance while minimizing physical trauma. And he lands on a highly specific metric.
Very specific.
The Tertis model is designed to be exactly 1634 inches long, which is 42.55 centimeters. He stated this exact size produced a grand C string sonority.
And the math backs him up. At 42.55 centimeters, the internal air volume of the instrument reaches a critical threshold that perfectly supports the lower frequencies without completely sacrificing the brilliance of the A string.
He also changed the shape a bit, right?
He did. He widened the bouts, the upper and lower curves of the instrument's body, to increase that internal volume while keeping the vibrating string length manageable.
But 42.55 centimeters is still a massive piece of wood. When you have a vibrating string length of that size, the distance between the notes on the fingerboard expands significantly.
It's a huge stretch.
And the orthodox method of string playing was built entirely around the odd-numbered positions, first, third, and fifth position. Why did the orthodox method rely so heavily on the odd positions, and what happens when you try to force that orthodox method onto a 42.55 centimeter instrument?
The reliance on odd positions comes directly from violin pedagogy. On a smaller violin, shifting from first to third position feels incredibly stable because the base of the hand makes physical contact with the rib of the instrument, providing a tactile anchor.
It's a built-in safety net for intonation.
Exactly. In first position, a violinist can easily stretch their fourth finger, the pinky, to reach a whole step. But if you take that exact same hand frame and impose it on a 42.55 centimeter string length, stretching that fourth finger to hit a whole step requires severe ulnar deviation.
You're just destroying your hand.
The player is physically ripping their hand open, straining the tendons in the wrist and the interosseous muscles between the fingers. Over time, this leads to chronic injury, poor intonation, and a complete inability to maintain the relaxed forearm necessary for the continuous vibrato we just discussed.
You cannot execute a fluid continuous vibrato if your hand is paralyzed by a maximum stretch.
Impossible.
So he essentially reprogrammed the entire geography of the fingerboard. It's like a pianist deciding to use their thumbs on the black keys just to reach a wider chord. He broke the orthodox rules to make the physics of the instrument serve the music.
That's a great analogy. He realized that the concept of stretching was the enemy. Instead of forcing the fingers to reach across vast distances in first position, he devised a fingering system that relied heavily on half, second, and fourth positions.
The even position.
Yes, these were the even positions that the orthodox string world had largely ignored because they lacked that easy tactile anchor against the instrument's body.
Let's visualize this for a second for everyone listening. If I am playing a scale passage that requires me to reach a high note on a large instrument, the old way tells me to stay anchored in first position and violently stretch my pinky. What does the Tertis method tell me to do?
The Tertis method tells you to abandon the anchor.
Just let it go.
Just let it go. Instead of stretching the pinky, you keep the hand in a compact, relaxed, neutral block. You shift the entire hand up a half step into half position or a whole step into second position. You navigate the large fingerboard through a series of micro shifts, creeping up and down the neck while the hand remains perfectly relaxed.
Wow.
By utilizing the half, second, and fourth positions on an equal basis with the first and third, you eliminate the need for any awkward extensions.
It's a brilliant biomechanical hack. He removed the static anchor and replaced it with dynamic fluid movement. By keeping the hand in a relaxed block, the player retains the flexibility required to maintain continuous vibrato and flawless intonation, completely neutralizing the physical strain of the 42.55-centimeter instrument.
It saved careers.
But once he engineered the ultimate instrument and the technique to actually play it without injury, he faced a massive void. The repertoire simply didn't exist.
Right, what do you play?
Exactly. The great composers of the 18th and 19th centuries had not written concertos for an instrument that they believed was restricted to the pig department.
This is where Tertis the engineer becomes Tertis the musical architect. If the repertoire didn't exist, he was going to forge it himself. He began a relentless campaign of transcription, attacking the most sacred literature of the violin and cello.
And he started with the big guns.
The most audacious example occurred in 1911 when he performed Johann Sebastian Bach's D minor Chaconne, originally from the Partita No. 2 for solo violin. Tertis transposed it down a perfect fifth to G minor.
Transposing the Bach Chaconne to a 42.55-centimeter fingerboard is almost unthinkable.
It is terrifying.
I mean, the Chaconne is a polyphonic nightmare on a standard violin. It requires massive triple and quadruple stops, lightning-fast string crossings, and intricate barrelage bowing. Doing that on a fingerboard with a wider radius and thicker strings requires superhuman right-hand string clearance and left-hand agility.
It does, and the fact that he executed it successfully fundamentally altered the perception of the instrument's capabilities. Paul Cropper, one of Tertis's students, actually recalled hearing him perform the Chaconne.
What did he say?
He noted that while it is notoriously difficult to bring off on the violin, it is bordering on impossible on a large viola, yet Tertis delivered it with impeccable intonation, perfect chordal voicing, and his signature massive tone.
That's unbelievable.
And he also tackled classical chamber repertoire, transcribing Mozart's Andante from the duet in B-flat for 2 violas, and taking Beethoven's trio, Opus 87, originally written for 2 oboes and English horn, and arranging it for 3 violas.
The transcriptions proved the instrument's mechanical viability, but a true renaissance required original compositions. Tertis heavily pressured the English composers of his era to write for him. Arnold Bax composed a notoriously demanding sonata, which Tertis actually recorded with Bax himself playing the piano.
A legendary recording.
And in 1908, York Bowen wrote a viola concerto that Tertis premiered with the Royal Philharmonic Society. But the most historically fascinating interaction he had with a composer involves William Walton and his viola concerto.
Oh, this story is incredible. The Walton Concerto is a cornerstone of the modern repertoire, and it was written with the explicit expectation that Tertis would give the premiere performance.
But he didn't, did he?
No. When Tertis received the manuscript, he reviewed the score, looked at the jagged rhythmic complexities, the biting harmonic language, and the entirely unprecedented technical demands, and he rejected it. He candidly admitted that he simply did not understand the music.
I love that he was honest enough to say, "I don't get it," to a major composer. The rhythmic drive of the Walton Concerto is incredibly aggressive. It doesn't rely on the lush, romantic, continuous phrasing that Tertis had built his entire pedagogy around.
Right, it's spiky, syncopated, modernist.
It totally makes sense that a pioneer of romantic, continuous tone would look at that score and feel totally alienated.
It was a generational and stylistic clash. However, the true measure of Tertis's artistic integrity is not that he rejected it, but what he did afterward.
Which was?
Well, after Paul Hindemith stepped in to premiere the work, Tertis sat down and rigorously studied Walton's score. He stripped away his own stylistic biases, recognized the sheer structural genius of the composition, publicly reversed his earlier appraisal, and went on to champion the concerto, demanding that his own advanced students learn it.
That requires a stunning lack of ego. To be the undisputed king of your instrument and publicly admit, "I was wrong, this music is valid, and you all must study it."
He put the music above himself.
And his vision for the instrument went far beyond solo concertos. He was obsessed with the acoustic properties of multiple violas playing together. He championed the chamber viola ensemble.
The concept of a viola ensemble wasn't entirely his invention. We can look back to Anton Wranitzky, who composed multiple works for the instrument before 1800, but Tertis popularized the concept for the 20th century. He actively promoted Benjamin Dale's short pieces for 6 violas.
What happens acoustically when you put 6 42.55-centimeter instruments in a room together? Why is that specific timbre so compelling?
It has to do with the overtone series. When you have an ensemble composed entirely of the same instrument, the upper partials of the harmonic series align perfectly.
So they don't clash.
Right. With 6 large model violas, you generate a massive, rich, lower mid-range fundamental. But because they're all producing the exact same spectrum of overtones, the sound locks together into a dense choral resonance that is incredibly warm and homogeneous.
Like a choir.
Exactly. It eliminates the timbral clash you sometimes get in a standard string quartet when the brilliant overtones of the E string on the violin rub against the darker resonance of the cello. Dr. Thomas Tatton actually conducted exhaustive research on this phenomenon and documented 29 original works for multiple violas, ranging from trios to 12-part ensembles, many of which were directly dedicated to Tertis.
So he didn't just build a technique, he built an ecosystem. An instrument, a fingering system, a solo repertoire, and a chamber repertoire. But an ecosystem dies if it isn't passed down. This brings us to the pedagogical fortress he built, the master teacher and the English school.
The legacy of the English School of Viola playing rests entirely on the shoulders of the students who survived his studio. It is a roster of historical titans: Harry Danks, C. Sidney Arrington, Paul Krupper, Bernard Shore, Rebecca Clark, Eric Coates.
And Primrose, right?
Even William Primrose, yes. Who wasn't a direct student in the room, but he built his career on the foundation of respect that Tertis had established in London.
The environment inside that teaching studio was fascinating. On one hand, he was incredibly generous. C. Sidney Arrington recalled that as a young professional, he paid a lesson fee of only 25 shillings. Tertis would routinely let the hour-long lesson run over, and then he would take the student for a brisk walk and buy them dinner.
He cared about them as people.
But musically, the room was a crucible.
Oh, he was fiercely demanding. Paul Krupper described Tertis as immensely thorough, refusing to let the slightest musical or technical flaw go unaddressed. His obsession with intonation bordered on the fanatical. Krupper stated that faulty intonation, no matter how slight, was anathema to him.
Harry Danks, who eventually became the principal of the BBC Symphony Orchestra, shared a story about his very first lesson. He brought in Tertis's own arrangement of the Elgar Cello Concerto. Before Danks was even halfway down the first page, Tertis halted him and ruthlessly attacked his intonation. Danks admitted it drove him to the brink of despair.
I can only imagine.
Let's pause and talk about intonation for a second. On a string instrument, intonation isn't binary like a piano. What was Tertis actually listening for when he demanded perfect intonation?
He was listening for expressive intonation, which is deeply tied to just intonation rather than the equal temperament of a piano. On a piano, a G sharp and an A flat are the exact same physical key.
Right.
But on a fingerboard, they have entirely different harmonic functions. A G sharp leading up to an A needs to be pitched slightly higher, leaning into the resolution. An A flat resolving down to a G needs to be pitched slightly lower.
Because it's pulling downwards.
Exactly. Tertis's ear was hypersensitive to these microscopic harmonic tendencies. If a student played a leading tone that lacked the necessary upward gravitational pull, the phrase was acoustically dead to him, and he would stop the lesson immediately.
But here's the most jarring pedagogical detail from the source material. Danks noted, and I'll quote him here, "My lessons always consisted of pieces for the repertoire, never scales or studies. In fact, they were never mentioned."
It's what?
Is expecting a student to just know their scales and entirely ignoring them in the lesson a stroke of genius? Or is it just a teacher refusing to do the boring part of the job? How does a teacher who is fanatically obsessed with perfect intonation completely ban scales from the lesson room?
It is a masterclass in psychological expectation. Tertis was teaching at the highest level of the Royal Academy. He understood that mechanical perfection, the ability to play flawlessly in tune across all strings, mastering the half, second, and fourth positions, was the baseline requirement for entry.
You don't go there to learn the basics.
Exactly. You do not go to a master of interpretation to learn how to execute a 3-octave scale. By explicitly banning mechanics from the lesson, he placed the entire burden of technical maintenance squarely on the student. If you walked into his room and your intonation failed because you hadn't done your scales at home, the lesson was over.
So what do they actually do in the lesson?
He demanded that the hour spent with him be reserved exclusively for art, for tone color, for phrasing, for manipulating the continuous vibrato. Now, he did prescribe scales for other students in the preface of his transcription of the Sebsik scale studies, but inside his own studio, the mechanics were assumed, and the music was the sole focus.
He treated them like finished artists, and in doing so, he forced them to become finished artists. It is a brilliant, ruthless efficiency. This intense dedication allowed Tertis to live long enough to witness the total transformation of his instrument. Which brings us to a poetic historical comparison. We're looking at a tale of two giants, Lionel Tertis and Pablo Casals.
The timeline parallels between Tertis and Casals are practically written by a novelist. They were both born on the exact same day, December 29th, 1876.
Which is just spooky.
It really is. They both dedicated their lives to elevating instruments that occupied the inner and lower voices of the string family, instruments that had not yet achieved the universal solo status of the violin. They both redefined the physical mechanics of playing, much like Paganini had revolutionized the violin a century earlier.
And they both lived forever.
Right. They both experienced incredible longevity, with Casals living to 97 and Tertis living to 99.
The great pianist Arthur Rubinstein shared a story that proves how uniquely identifiable Tertis's sound was. Casals was arriving at a studio in London. Inside, a Mozart string quartet was being rehearsed. Casals stopped at the front door, listened for a moment, and asked, "Who plays the viola?"
Through the door.
Yes, just from the street, through a door, he could instantly identify the depth of Tertis's grand sonority bleeding through the texture of a Mozart quartet.
It speaks to the absolute acoustic supremacy of the 42.55 centimeter model and Tertis's continuous vibrato. But while their artistic impacts mirror each other, the historical burden Tertis carried was vastly heavier. Well, Casals possessed immense genius, but he was not the first cellist to perform as a soloist. He had historical precedents. The cello had a concerto literature dating back to Haydn and Boccherini. When Tertis began, he was hacking his way through an untouched wilderness. There was zero precedent for an international solo career on the viola.
He had to fight the pig department prejudice every single time he walked on stage. And that leads us to the profound divergence in their narratives, specifically in the year 1936, because this is the year history treats them very differently. In 1936, Pablo Casals becomes a global geopolitical figure. He goes into voluntary exile to protest the fascist dictatorship of General Franco, vowing never to return to Spain while Franco is in power.
Casals transcends music. He becomes a symbol of human rights and political resistance. Millions of people who had never listened to a Bach cello suite knew the name Pablo Casals. But in that exact same year, 1936, Lionel Tertis experiences a devastating physical crisis that forces him off the stage entirely.
He develops acute fibrositis in his right arm. Fibrositis is a severe chronic inflammation of the connective tissues and muscles. For a man whose entire philosophy was built on the seamless, continuous weight and flexibility of the right bow arm, fibrositis is a death sentence. Let's look at the biomechanics of that for a second. Could the immense physical effort required to continuously draw sound out of a 16 34-inch instrument for 40 years have contributed to the breakdown of his arm?
It is highly probable. The repetitive strain of applying continuous rotational torque through the index finger to equalize the tone at the tip of the bow, combined with the sheer kinetic energy required to manipulate the heavy C string day after day, it takes an inevitable toll on the tendons and fascia of the arm.
The body just gives out.
For 2 years, he played through agonizing pain, but by 1936, the arm simply failed. His final major public performance was on February 4th, 1937, celebrating his 60th birthday, performing Berlioz's Herald in Italy with the BBC Orchestra under the baton of Ernest Ansermet.
It is wild to think that in 1936, one man becomes a global political icon, and the other, who did just as much for his instrument, is forced into the shadows by a physical ailment, completely forgotten by the wider world until his late-life resurgence.
The general public may have forgotten him, but the inner sanctum of the musical world absolutely did not. On June 13, 1937, a massive banquet was held in London to honor his legacy. It was attended by over 200 of his students, colleagues, and friends.
A real tribute.
Definitely. Ralph Vaughan Williams and Sir Thomas Beecham delivered speeches. Telegrams poured in from Fritz Kreisler, William Walton, and Pablo Casals himself. His legacy was heavily protected by that English school he built. He did briefly return to playing in 1939 to raise money for wartime charities and to publicly demonstrate his new Tertis Model viola, but he largely remained out of the international spotlight until the very end of his life.
The ultimate resurgence happened in 1974 when he published his autobiography, My Viola and I. A completely new generation of players read it, looked at the fingerings they were using, looked at the 16 34-inch instruments in their cases, and realized that every modern convenience they enjoyed was directly authored by this one man.
Without Tertis, the instrument remains an acoustic compromise played by failed violinists. He gave it geometry, he gave it acoustics, and he gave it dignity.
Let's pull this all together. A young gigging pianist utilizes his understanding of polyphony and arm weight, sits in the inner chair of a string quartet, and completely rejects the established orthodoxies of the 19th century.
He changed everything.
He demands continuous vibrato and inaudible bow changes. He scientifically determines that 42.55 centimeters is the exact acoustic threshold for true resonance. He saves the human hand by rewriting fingering systems to rely on half, second, and fourth positions. He forces composers to write masterpieces, transcribes the unplayable, and builds a pedagogical fortress that bans scales in favor of pure artistic interpretation.
He took an instrument that was considered a liability and engineered it into a solo powerhouse.
Which leaves me with a final thought for everyone listening to this deep dive, especially those of you staring at your own cases right now. Lionel Tertis looked at an instrument that the entire world dismissed as the pig department, and instead of accepting its limitations, he completely dismantled the rules. He changed the geometry of the hand, he changed the physics of the bow, and he changed the physical size of the wood itself. He didn't adapt to the limitations, he annihilated them.
That's the takeaway, yeah.
So the next time you hit a wall in your own playing, a passage you can't reach, a tone you can't produce, a phrase that feels physically impossible, ask yourself, what physical or technical limitation are you currently accepting purely because it's always been done that way? What if the only thing standing between you and a massive sonority is a 300-year-old rule that deserves to be broken? Go pick up your instruments, question the mechanics, and keep experimenting.
Thank you for joining us, and we hope this summary and analysis have been of great help to you. Please remember that this is only a summary and can never replace the book itself. Therefore, we invite you to truly immerse yourself in the work by reading the original text. If this content was useful to you, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell. Remember, you can share this video with your friends to help our community continue to grow. Warmest regards, and remember, there is always time to learn and explore the world of classical music. A Viola Studio production.